Welcome back, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to the Groove KSQ YouTube channel. Really appreciate your support. Please be sure to hit the like and subscribe button when you have a chance. I'm very fortunate to be joined today by John Evans. John is the principal timpanist of the Naples Philharmonic in Naples, Florida, and John and I go way back, and he has carved out a very successful career for himself playing timpani and orchestral percussion, and we're going to talk today about how he did that and how he got to where he is today. John, thanks very much for joining us.
Oh, thanks, Brian, for having me. I appreciate it.
So the purpose of this series is to help younger musicians, and when I say younger, I mean high school, early stages of university study perhaps, whether they're in a conservatory or a university program, to help them navigate becoming a professional musician, because I think the career aspect of this business is so unique. It's not like, it really is not like anything else. It's not like being an accountant or a banker or, working in real estate or something like that. You have to be an artist. You have to be a business person at the same time in many ways. And that part of the educational process is something I'm really interested in. So I was wondering if you could kind of describe what you're doing today, and then we'll go back, kind of retrace your steps through your undergrad years and DCI. We should definitely talk about that. And let's start with the Naples Philharmonic. When did you get the seat for the timpani chair, if you will?
Yeah, I won my job with the Naples Philharmonic in 1991. I'd been a student of Alan Abel's at Temple University, started there in the fall of 1989, graduated in May of 91, and really fortunate to win this job the next month. And then I've been here, this is my 30th season, kind of hard to believe, but so I'm down here playing. That's my full-time job. And then I also do quite a bit of studio teaching. I usually have a studio somewhere between 10, 12, 13 people, somewhere around there. And then a lot of teaching at high schools in the area. I spent 15 years with Naples High School, a gentleman by the name of Melvin Maxwell. I went there to work for a year and stayed for 15 till he retired. And then he and I both went to the high school where my kids were going to end up going, and my youngest son is now going to graduate this year. I've been with that program for 12 years. And that's not just marching band, that's also going in, working with the tubas or whoever needs help. I do have a music ed degree. That was my undergrad. And then also whatever gigging I can do in the area, what other ensembles. There's not a whole lot in this area, not like when I lived in Philadelphia or Columbus, Ohio, but there's still some.
So it's not an unusual fact pattern where, yes, you've got the orchestra job, but you have to supplement with all these other, I don't want to call them side gigs, but you're supplementing with teaching privately and also at the high school level. That's a story that I think is lost on a lot of young musicians coming up. The amount of hustle that is required is something else. It really is.
If you want to just have a job playing with an orchestra and that's it, there are so few of those jobs that are going to probably pay the salary that you want. Now, don't get me wrong. I make a nice salary, benefits, retirement. But if you want the extras as far as being able to keep my kids in the activities they wanted to be involved with, things along those lines, that's where all that extra came into play. And my wife's a public school teacher, so neither of us picked incredibly high-paying professions. So as you said, you have to hustle and have those extra things besides the main job.
Did you have any, one thing that we had Michael Hall in on the last episode, he's the conductor of the Kennett Symphony, and from talking to him when he was a young man, all he wanted, music was it. That, there was no plan B? When you were younger, coming up through high school, at what point did you decide music was what you wanted to spend your life pursuing? And did you have a plan B? Was there, well, if this doesn't work out, I'll go work in sales or, something like that?
Yeah, no, there was no plan B. Probably should have been some sort of a plan B, but my original plan was I wanted to be a college percussion teacher. That was thinking in high school, wanted to get my degree, teach at a university. Not really sure exactly why, but that was how. And then not knowing any better, I thought, well, I should have an education degree. So my undergrad was music ed. And then it was partway through that I realized, I'd rather be playing than teaching. So I was fortunate when I was in Columbus, Ohio, I got to know the guys that played with the orchestra. A fellow by the name of Phil Shipley, who's currently the principal there, was very helpful. A couple other guys, the principal percussionist, the principal timpanist, I took lessons from them. And then they guided me towards my studies with Alan Abel in Philadelphia. So I graduated with an music ed degree, but then I took 2 years and just practiced before I even got into the program with Abel, because I started kind of late. I was playing a lot of marimba solos and going that route, thinking I'd be the next marimba artist. But then that's another job that really there's not a whole lot of people that can make a living doing that. That's why a lot of people teach at universities, why they do that. And so 2 years of hard practice, then got into the program with Abel when I was 24, and then graduated with him when I was 26. So I had the ed background. I enjoy teaching, and that's kind of been the way I mainly supplemented my playing income.
The 2 years between undergrad and Temple University, what were those years like? When you say you practiced, what was your schedule?
So
Just
my
in general
schedule,
terms.
oh yeah, no. My schedule was pretty much, I would get up in the morning and practice for 5 or 6 hours a day. If you want to be an orchestral percussionist and you start at 18 and you go to the right schools, they're going to put you on that right track. But I was really 21 before I really wanted to do that. So I had a lot of catch up to do. So I would practice. I was taking lessons with those guys in Columbus. I was driving out to take lessons from Mr. Abel. That was an 8-hour drive. My in-laws live about 2 hours outside of Philadelphia, so I could either stay there the night before or have my lessons, stay with them, then do the drive back. And I was also driving up to the University of Michigan. Now, you need to realize I'm an Ohio State undergrad, but Michael Udow, who is the professor up there, who had been a student of Alan Abel's in high school. So I took lessons from him, and he was very helpful with some of my playing also. So I was basically just practicing, taking lessons, and then I had several places, I think 3 different places at the time I was teaching privately, and then several different marching bands. Because as you mentioned drum corps earlier, I started with the SAR of Indiana Drum and Bugle Corps in 85 and 86 as a player, then was on the staff 87 to 89 before moving to Philadelphia, where I was with the Crossmen. But in the fall, I was definitely involved with marching bands in the area.
So that's quite a story in terms of dedication to. So you were driving from Columbus to Philly to study with Alan Abel, then going back home the next day or that part I didn't know. I thought you had moved to Philly and lived there for a bit.
Well, no, I was in Philadelphia from 89 to 91. No, okay. So my lessons with Alan Abel were pre me getting into his program. So I've never been afraid to ask. And I actually learned that from one of the guys that I worked with at Stardom, Indiana. He had been a part of the Cavaliers Drum and Bugle Corps with their guard for 12 years. I mean, he started young and was there, and then we started at Stard together in 87. His name's Jeff Wroblewski. And I would watch, he would just ask for things. And I saw him get into like hotel rooms and things because he just asked. So I learned to ask. So the first time I played for Abel to audition, I didn't get in. So in 88, I auditioned. He didn't take me. And I just said, hey, would you mind teaching me? And he said, okay. So I'd say I probably did 6 or 7 lessons with him that next year before getting accepted into his studio. So, and then I started there and lived in Philadelphia for 2 years. So that's how that process went.
And that's, there's a huge lesson there for young people in that things don't always go the way you plan them the first time out.
Oh,
You may have a great idea and you may think you're ready for something. You can't stop at the first obstacle.
not at all.
Sure.
And just, I thought I would just be in Columbus for 1 year after I got my undergrad, but it ended up being 2. I did get into a program, but I realized that program wasn't the right program for what I wanted to do down the line. So I was, you wouldn't call it a runner up, but the second person for the University of Michigan position, because he only took one grad student a year.
Mm-hmm.
And then didn't get in with Abel, was waitlisted somewhere else. But I went, those are the 2 guys that I'd really want to study with. So, like I said, I wasn't afraid to ask, saying, hey, can I come and work with you? And then accepted into both programs the next year. And when Mr. Udall called me, he said, I'm going to offer you the position, but I've already talked to Abel and I know he's offered you a spot. So enjoy Temple. Because he knew that was the better place for me to go with what I wanted to do.
Well, the decision to pursue education, if you're in a music program, to pursue music ed or music performance is something I know, I don't want to say frightens younger people, but following the performance route, as just for those of you who are watching, parents or whatever, music degrees are often divided into 2 kind of branches. There's the education side of music degrees, and then there's a performance side to music degrees where you can actually concentrate in performance on your instrument, piano, marimba, saxophone, whatever it might be. But for students, that's kind of a scary decision because I think, I could be wrong, but I think that a lot of students perceive music ed as a safer choice, perhaps. I'm not quite sure if that's just my imagination, but.
No, I think you're right. The performance aspect can be a little scary because there's really, when you get done, there's no exact position. If you're going for music ed, you're looking to probably go into the public schools and teach with the public schools. Whereas if it's performance, it's what are you going to do after that? Now, I currently have 4 students that have gotten into university programs in the past couple years, and I try to persuade students not to go into music. And I know that may sound a little strange, but I'll sit down with them and their parents. They usually tell me early in high school that that's what they want to do, and then I'll try to talk to them their sophomore year. But then we have the important talk in their junior year. And I explain how hard it is. And if you especially want to go the performance route, which I currently have 2 students at Florida State and 1 at University of Central Florida, which are very good percussion programs in the state of Florida, we sit down and we talk and we go, here's what the competition is like out there. Here's what you have to do, which is basically prepare to get into the best grad program you can. And you have to look at 5 to 6 hours of practicing a day, because if you aren't doing it, somebody else is. And very serious talk, and then they need to decide once they get there if they want to pursue that or not. And currently, the people that are there are doing great. I talk to the professors, and they say they're working really hard doing what they need to do, but it's still a crapshoot because there are so few jobs out there. I might have kind of gone off in a different direction you wanted to go with that, but I kind of explain the end goal, how difficult it is to get a job and what you have to do to prepare to get to it, which is, I think, kind of what you're
Sure.
talking about, that the students don't get all that information.
Well, and when you think of the fact that the number of orchestras in the United States before COVID was shrinking.
Yeah.
Every year there's one less ensemble, they fall. It's just a very tough, business model to keep going.
Right.
And the ones that are going to come out of the other side of this shutdown intact, the number of those organizations will be even fewer, I suspect, because we're now looking at 2 seasons getting wiped out, basically.
Mm-hmm.
I know this is going out of order, but I did want to talk to you about Star of Indiana. So,
Sure.
1989, the British Invasion show has always been one of my favorites,
Oh, cool.
and I knew you had marched there. And by the way, everybody should know, John won the mallet individuals solo competition at DCI. What, that was 87?
86.
86. So if anybody follows DCI or WGI, you know how special of a player you have to be to achieve that. But the British Invasion show, I just always thought it was the coolest. It was kind of a throwback, and that was really the emergence of the horn line, which in some ways created or gave rise to Carolina Crown in an very indirect way. That's a whole nother topic.
Whole nother show, but no, yeah, it did. So,
What were some of your highlights from that 89 season?
oh wow, man, we are going out of order, but no, that's good. I'm glad you brought that up. That was a great year. So just to go back, I really didn't know a whole lot about drum and bugle corps going into college. I went and saw one show when I was a high schooler with my high school band director. Very cool. I think that was in 1983. But then I met a fellow who had marched with the Garfield Cadets. Kind of funny. Snare drummer in 81 and 82 wouldn't have aged out till 85. So the 83, 84, 85 year, he didn't march. He worked with the Bluecoats. Now, this is Bluecoats back then, not the Bluecoats today.
Right.
That's when they were up and building. But he worked as staff rather than march his last 3 years. But he's the one that, watching him, talking to him, I thought, oh, this might be a pretty good thing. So I thought about being in the Bluecoats. But then I ended up, a guy by the name of Ray Weiner said, hey, why don't you come down to Pride of Cincinnati and play? I'm going to have Phil Shipley, who I mentioned earlier from the Columbus Symphony. He's going to be the guy working with the sidelines. So you can just work on excerpts and do all these things with him when you aren't doing the show music. So he sold me, and then they folded. And a lot of the brass from Pride of Cincinnati went to Star of Indiana because they were looking for brass players. And the drum line was full. A lot of Bridgman had gone there because they had gone through a transition. And there was one girl who was a Morehead State student who got mono and couldn't march. So I get a call from Dennis DeLucia, who I didn't know who he was.
Dennis.
So Dennis called up and goes, hey, we have this spot in the pit. Would you be interested? So I'm like, yeah. And I'm talking to him. Like I said, I had no clue who he was. And then, so that's how I ended up at Star. So I marched 85, 86, and I was going to go then teach the pit at Bluecoats because Bob Dubinsky, who was part of Star of Indiana, was also taking over as the caption head at Bluecoats. So I was going to go there, but then Star had an opening starting in 87, so I stayed there. Okay, so 87, 88, 89, they allowed me to do most of the writing for the pit in 89. So that was my first time for doing a whole book. Bob did the opener, I did the rest of it. And we just had a great group of players. The snare line and the tenors, basses were clean. Yeah, that was a fun year to teach. Great pit to work with that year. Great writing. It was, as you said, the British Invasion show. It was a lot of not orchestral music, but band music. And there would be brass judges who would say, I don't know how I hear it, but I hear all the woodwind parts. You had Jim Prime, who's the arranger, who's a phenomenal arranger.
Yep.
So with that, and it's just a year we build on. The drumline won semifinals, did not win finals, unfortunately. But that year rivals along with the playing of the 92 Crossman, and probably one of my favorite shows, except for I love the Pat Metheny show that I was involved with Crossman of 91. Those were just really fun shows. So that, as you said, but that was the emergence of the horn line. Donnie Van Doren was the brass caption head, and that's when he really got the group flowing the way he wanted. It's hard to just walk in and instantaneously have a group, because he was there in '86, which was a big improvement, and then some changes, and then back in, and that's what built. And then, as you said, a lot of those people then went to Carolina Crown, and it's very similar. So Garfield Cadets was where he started. Then that sound went to Star. Then that sound went to Carolina Crown.
Yeah, I just remember, and I was a kid. I was like 17 years old that summer, and not being familiar with Star at all. And then, we saw them on tour. My first Crossman tour was that summer. And I remember just, every once in a while you hear a sound or an ensemble that just totally changes your perception of what is possible. And 89 Star was like that, I thought, just the whole overall program.
Well, that was just very briefly. It was so Kurt Gay came in. I couldn't be on tour much with the '90 Crossman. I started with Crossman in '90 after going to Philadelphia. That's a whole other long story. But Kurt Gay, who marched in '89, and I remember him telling me, these guys on the bus are listening, they really like 89 Star. He was just impressed that the snare line was all listening to that. And yeah, that was a really good line and a good core. So
we'll have to do a part 2 focused on drum corps. I think that's a whole, speaking, it's interesting, the orchestras and operas are in a precarious spot, I think, by and large. The Metropolitan Opera canceled 2 seasons.
Right.
And those that aren't able to pivot to delivering performances online are going to have a hard time. And if you go over to the DCI world and the WGI world, the indoor percussion and guard, they're all in the same boat. The numbers are smaller, the budgets are smaller, but it's the same pressures. No money coming in, membership is scattering. And when this whole shutdown happened, it seems hard to believe people were actually debating whether there would be a season in 2020.
Right.
And now that we're getting a sense of the scope of this, crisis, now people are, the debate is, well, will there be a 21 season?
Right.
Will everybody come back in 22? Like, who knows what the future holds? But it's a tough time to come out of school for sure and be a performance major or anywhere in the arts right now, because they're getting thrown into an economy that's just in complete upheaval. But
right.
it'll pass. Like, I try to stay positive and tell everybody there's going to be a vaccine at some point. Like, this right. Science will figure this out soon. We just don't know when, but there will be an end point, and there will be opportunities to perform. And you do have to adapt. And one of the things I thought would be interesting to get your viewpoint on was, if you are in a performing arts organization, what do you do to maintain connection with the audience? Like, what is Naples doing, for example?
So with Naples, I'm part of the COVID protocol committee. So we've gone through, we have I can't remember how many page document, but pretty extensive about how we would reopen and restart. So as you said, we didn't do anything last season after March 18th. So the season was shut down. We were very fortunate that the board continued to pay. Some orchestras just shut down and pay ended. But we were fortunate that didn't happen. We did take some concessions for this season. Just about every orchestra that is performing right now, well, not just about, as far as I know, every orchestra has taken some sort of concession. And unfortunately, some orchestras have just furloughed all their musicians. So I'm incredibly fortunate to not be in that situation. What we've decided to do is start small. And everything that we're doing is chamber music oriented, bringing in small groups into the hall, meaning small groups of patrons, 84 patrons. They've worked their way to position them on stage 6 feet apart. So you have groups of 2, groups of 4, because you figure those people are coming in, exposed to each other. And then everybody has to wear a mask. There's protocols set in place. We are getting COVID tested every week. So if I'm starting a new series, I have rehearsals on Monday. So I have to be COVID tested between Friday and Sunday. So we are doing that just to keep the musicians safe, and so the audience knows that that's taking place as they go back in. Some orchestras are going back a little bit bigger, maybe with 50 to 60 people, 60 being the largest, depending on the size of the hall. I know that Tampa and Jacksonville, there's one other full-time orchestra in Florida, Sarasota. They're staying small season, but they're going back with 45 to 50 people right away, playing Beethoven and Mozart, whereas we're doing chamber music. Then the plan is to hopefully, as things go through, see if a vaccine, check the numbers, then to do things with our core, which is around 50 people. So do 40 to 50 players on stage with the audience spread out. Now, having said that, the organization had $6 million in tickets sold last season that were never used. So this year is hopefully just going to be a wash, that $6 million can then translate to this year, and we just don't hemorrhage much more money than that. We have a very good board that had set up an emergency fund, so that emergency fund's been drained to get us through this next season. I don't want to go into all the details. I don't know what they want us to do, but luckily we were in a position, if the worst case scenario came up like this, there was a way to get through it, which we seem to have. So hopefully that answers your question. So the way we're doing it is to try to keep some contact with the audience, starting out with smaller groups. Schools are not allowing any field trips, which makes sense. Mm-hmm. So anything that's through for a school, we're doing videotaping of the programs they normally come to the hall, then they can be played at their schools. And then right now we're assessing what's going to happen in February. Can we go back with those larger groups and do chamber orchestra rather than just chamber music of 4, 5, 6 people?
Of all the things you said, I think the amount of foresight that is being displayed by the organization is really outstanding, particularly with the regular testing, because it's I can only speak for people in my circle and things that I've heard from organizations up here. That's not on everybody's radar, and it should be, because at least if you're testing every week, somebody tests positive, you can act on it immediately rather than not know. Like, this is not a situation where ignorance is bliss. Like, you're better off affirmatively knowing, yes, you're positive, no, you're negative, because then that enables you to do certain things or quarantine and keep everybody else safe. So the testing thing, I find that's very, very smart. That's awesome.
What will be good, testing's expensive right now, so they're absorbing that cost. And the way we have it set up is when we do a large group. So this next week is going to be the largest group we've had on stage, 36 people. It's a program we call Trip to the Phil, where every 5th grader and 7th grader in the county comes. They hear the full orchestra play. Well, we're only going to put 36 people out, but there are standby musicians for every single person that can have one. We only have one timpanist, we only have one percussionist, so there's no standby for us. But, violins, there's several standbys. So if somebody would test positive, the standby goes in. We're also doing for the chamber music, this is very odd, but there are some groups that are practicing and they may never perform, but they're practicing in case somebody comes up positive in another group. That group can be polled and the other group is put into place. And we've actually done that already this year. So if anything that has a paying customer, we want to make sure that we don't have to cancel the performance, that we just slide somebody else in. And like I said, unfortunately, we've already had to use that, but that was kind of good foresight as we moved forward to do that.
Well, that's pretty genius to have. I mean, basically, you've got, I don't want to say substitute ensembles, but you've got
we do.
Redundant ensembles. So if Group A can't go, you guys get, the audience gets Group B. That's fantastic.
So,
Everybody should be paying attention out there to what John just said, by the way.
so that, it's kind of funny when we were talking in August, because we opened up the contract and worked everything out for the year. And that's not a norm that you do, but we discussed this, and I'm really glad we put that into place.
Well, that's really one of the most comprehensive strategies I've heard of any on. The easy thing to do for these organizations is we're just going to stop. We're just going to hit the brakes. We'll come back to our old model when the conditions allow us to do that. Conditions might not allow us to do that. And no, I think those are all fantastic tips. I appreciate you sharing those with us. Before we go, you are in one of the most epic PR pictures I've ever seen. I'm going to put this up on the screen. Hold on a second. I don't know if you'll be able to see this. The audience will be able to see this. Where did it go? Well, oh, I just covered you up. Sorry.
No, that's fine.
Sorry, everybody. I'm learning this software. Here we go.
I do realize that's a little younger version of me, but
Can you see that okay on your screen?
yeah, I can see it.
Oh, great. So tell us a little bit about this setup. Now, I'll readily admit I am not a student of timpani. I would like to be, but I had never seen a setup like this, and I know there's a specific piece attached to it. And I was wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So this is the Johann Fischer Symphony for 8 Timpani and String Orchestra. And, oh no, not string. I take it back. It's not string orchestra. There are some winds in it also. But I performed this a couple times with the orchestra. And what you basically have there is a G up to a high G. So G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So I have an octave to play with. And he writes melodies for timpani on that. And that was a very popular thing that was done in the late 1700s, early 1800s. There are pieces that have been found, and there's a gentleman that discovered these pieces and recreated them for orchestra. There's also a couple of duets that he wrote for timpani and oboe. Haven't played one of those yet, but I'm hoping to sometime. But yeah, so so I get to play melodies on timpani. No pedaling involved, because back then they wouldn't have the timpani that you'd pedal.
Right.
So you just set those 8 pitches and you play. So fun piece to play. Hope to play it again someday.
And that's not something you see very often. How often have you performed that piece?
So twice. I've performed it twice, and I know of 2 other performances in Florida. And guy that made the piece popular a few years ago is a guy by the name of Jonathan Haas. I know he would play it with different orchestras around, and I know some other people that have played it, but yeah, it's not all the time, just occasionally.
Well, it should be. It should be a thing.
Yeah.
In talking to younger students about soloing, on the drum set, the parallel here is people that are not drummers or haven't studied orchestral percussion react very viscerally to things like that. All they know is there's a lot of drums, and the performer looks like he's going crazy. And with drum soloing, sometimes the most technically difficult things are not visually the most interesting to look at. And the name of the game, you have to balance being an artist and being an entertainer to some extent. But yeah, I hope someday to see that live. It'll be nice if we can get back to normal here at some point.
Sure would.
So so if people are interested, if they're in, if they're in Florida or in the Southeast, to study with you, how do they reach you?
I'm on the Artist Naples, which is the umbrella company for the Naples Philharmonic. I'm on their website, so my email is provided there. So that's the easiest way. You can just Google Naples Philharmonic or Artist Naples, and they have bios of all the musicians. That's the easiest way is through the email that's there.
Okay, well, I'll link in the description, along with this video on YouTube, I'll pull all those links, and
Okay.
they will be in the description to the video, and viewers can just click through, because John's the real deal, definitely. And again, John, thanks very much for spending some time with us. I really, really do appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
All right, everybody, be sure to follow the YouTube channel, because we're going to do quite a few more of these interviews. And, if you're interested in studying drum set with me, or concert percussion, but not timpani, go see John for that. Marimba, go see John. But drum set, or if you're in the Northeast, just come find me. I teach through Zoom also, or via distance like this, so be happy to work with you. But again, John, thank you very much. And I look forward to seeing the reaction to this, because we need to hear more content like this with pros that are out there doing the job, and having a good quality of life, because I don't think we hear enough. Everybody's so concerned with being a rock star. You got to pay attention to how do we just make a living. That's the first step. So, all right. Well, thanks everybody for watching, and tune in next time.